Hi, and thanks for joining us for another episode of Ask Spurrell CPA. Today we're talking about should business owners buy used vehicles and equipment. Here with Yahweh again today. Yahweh, thanks for being here today. How are things going lately for you in T4 time?
It is good. Crazy busy, but we're surviving.
Excellent. So the quote here that I have to start off today is Robert Kiyosaki, the author of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I've used this one before. Good debt is a powerful tool, but bad debt can kill you, which is important to consider when we're buying equipment, and oftentimes we're buying equipment and vehicles on credit. So the statistic is 50% of all businesses are out of business in 5 years, and roughly a third of those go out of business because they run out of cash. And the story that we have are business owners that can't afford to pay for or get financing for the equipment that they need to do their jobs efficiently. So Yahweh, what are the questions do you think that these business owners should be asking?
Well, first, why should you plan on financing equipment rather than operating capital?
Yeah, great place to start. Generally, the options for financing equipment are significantly more and better and more favorable for financing equipment than it is going to be for financing operating capital. There's not a lot of options out there for operating capital. They're harder to get, harder to come by. Less likely that you're going to get approved. So if you're in any sort of a business or any sort of circumstances where you think cash flow is going to be an issue and you're going to have to buy equipment, finance that equipment. It's significantly easier to finance that equipment on the initial purchase and try to get financing later once you've run out of money for operating capital, run payroll, do advertising, wait for receivables.
Okay. Well, what type of loan in Canada exists specifically to help small business owners then?
So the Canada Small Business Financing Loan will lend you up to $350,000. You can get approval for up to $350,000. And essentially to buy, it's equipment, vehicles, leasehold improvements. But today we're talking about vehicles and equipment. So it's up to $350,000, and the banks are more apt to give you that loan when otherwise you'd be a higher credit risk because the federal government is effectively backing that loan. So they're acting as a guarantor. You're still on the hook with a personal guarantee these days, but the federal government is backing it too. So the banks are more agreeable that they'll lend to you, and when otherwise maybe they wouldn't give you conventional financing.
Okay. Well, how does this compare to manufacturer financing or leasing options?
Generally, it's a good baseline. So right now the Canada Small Business Financing Loan is prime plus 3%. We're just shy of 4% on prime here now, so we're talking 4 plus 3, 7%, which is comparable to I would call it grade A leasing opportunities. Sometimes you can do better on manufacturer financing or leasing, but for the most part, that's as good as you're going to get. Is that 7%? So oftentimes, especially the leasing options, are going to be more expensive. They're going to be a fallback position. So, we can get 10, 15, 20%. We've seen huge options, right? To get it, they'll give you financing through the manufacturer or through a leasing company that they recommend, but it's going to be far more expensive than the Canada Small Business Financing Program at 7%.
Okay. Well, how do the manufacturers then and leasing companies attempt to disguise these rates?
Yeah, so often the manufacturer will come with a rate to you and they say, oh, it's 5%, and it sounds fantastic, and it would seem like why would anybody go after the Canada Small Business Financing Program at 7%? Often that financing rate or the leasing rate that they're quoting you is, I want to say, fabricated. So they'll put things like application fees in there, and the big move is they disguise the price. So it'll be if you buy it in cash, it's $30,000, and if you finance it, it's $35,000, but it's at 0%. That's not really 0%. They just charge you an extra $5,000. So they really try to play with the fees associated with it, or they actually just change the price. So it's one price if you buy it or get your own financing, aka the Canada Small Business Financing Program, and it's a completely different price if you finance it through them. And that's what helps them. It's an increased price, so that's what helps them recover that rate. So when I hear financing rates quoted by manufacturers or leasing companies, my brain shuts off. I don't even listen to the rate. I just want to know how long is the term and what are the payments. and what would this piece of equipment be if we purchased it in cash? What's the best price we could get? And then we just calculate our own rates because we tune out their interest rate because we know it's often disguised with some of those factors.
Okay. Well, talking about the equipment, how does the age of the equipment or vehicle affect the length of the loan?
Yeah, so sometimes people are thinking that they're going to buy used equipment because it's going to be less of a strain on cash flow. But often, used equipment, used vehicles, we're not going to have as long to pay back a loan. So if you go to a bank and we try to, finance a piece of equipment, a piece of used equipment, it's already, let's say 5 years old, and the bank views that it has a useful economic life of 10 years, they're only going to give you 5 years to pay back that loan. Whereas if it's a brand new piece of equipment or vehicle, they might give you 7 to 10 years to pay back that loan. So even if the purchase price is higher, that monthly payment that we're going to be looking at is lower because you have a longer time period to pay back that loan. So often the life of the equipment, the newer it is, the longer they're going to give you to pay back the loan, and the lower the payment will be. So that's what can happen.
Okay. Well, can monthly payments on new equipment and vehicles then be higher than new ones?
Yeah, it can completely switch. Yeah, for sure. So I mean, you could have a used vehicle or piece of equipment, and maybe it's $30,000 to buy it used, and it's $40,000 to buy it new. But if you buy it new, you're going to get 10 years to pay it off, and if you buy it used, you're going to get 5 years to pay off. So the used monthly payment, although it's cheaper, the purchase price, that monthly payment could actually be bigger than the same payment on a new piece of equipment.
Oh, okay. That's good to know. How does the increased maintenance and fuel costs affect monthly cash flow?
Yeah, so often when you're talking about used equipment or used vehicles, that maintenance and fuel costs, the cost to operate the equipment, it starts to go up, right? When it's new, it generally doesn't break down that much. It's a little more fuel efficient. As that equipment ages, it's going to cost more to maintain it. And again, we're going to have difficulty getting operating capital to fix equipment when it breaks down. They want to finance the purchase of equipment. They don't want to finance cash shortfalls that relate from operations in terms of the banks and the finance companies. So that's a real important consideration. We can't just consider that monthly payment. We have to consider, hey, what's the likely fuel costs or maintenance costs on a used piece of equipment per month versus what's the fuel and maintenance costs on a new piece of equipment every month, and add that to the payment to start getting a real number that what's the actual monthly cash outflow here, because it might not be the cheapest used piece of equipment. Sometimes the new piece of equipment is going to have a less of a burden on the monthly cash flow.
Okay, well, how can less reliable vehicles and equipment increase wage costs or steal your time then?
Yeah, so this can be a bit of a switch for business owners. Either they think about in their personal life, a lot of personal financial gurus are going to say, hey, buy a used car, and it's going to be more of a value for you, because the time involved in getting that used car fixed and bringing it to the shop, might not be a big deal in your personal life because it's one car. You don't have anything else to do, and it's a little bit of strain on your personal time, but not much. But once you have a business, time is the most important capital that you have. There's 168 hours. It's more important than cash. I view time here and cash here. There's always ways to get more cash, but there's never a way to get more time. Yeah. And that time can be eaten up in you maintaining that equipment. You're out there getting your vehicle fixed instead of doing the estimate for a new job because you're broken down. Or your entire production is shut down because that piece of equipment is broke down. And that can have a huge cost. You can have guys that you're having to pay on payroll sitting around all day or working less effectively all week because they're missing this piece of equipment. So it's in addition to the monthly payment to buying it and the maintenance costs and the fuel costs, we also got to look at what are the downtime costs, because those are going to increase as the equipment gets older, and that's going to be a real cost. There's a lot of big successful companies out there, for example, on vehicles, that they've run the math on, hundreds or thousands of data points and realized that they're dumping their vehicles when they get to be 7 or 8 years old and in between 150 and 200,000 kilometers, because they just run the math and they realize that that's the best time to offload them, because they have to pay people to fix them. And oftentimes they have to pay people to bring the vehicle to the person who's going to fix it. So yeah, it's a big consideration, is the time involved with used equipment as well.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned payroll and paying people. How can used equipment and vehicles affect your brand and employee satisfaction?
Yeah. So I mean, what's it going to look like when you show up to that job site, or a customer comes to your place of business and you got this broken down old piece of equipment? We pay so much money to get the lead in the first place, to get the opportunity with the customer, and then we rattle their confidence with an old piece of equipment. They're wondering if this guy's serious or not too. So that's also a big consideration for sure.
What makes business owners spend too much time on equipment and vehicles?
So I think it's spend too much. It would be like, in terms of time, it's they get older and they just don't replace them at the right time. And then in terms of money, like often, even when we're getting to business owners who want to acquire new equipment, sometimes it starts to become an ego purchase or an emotional purchase. So, we're sitting here, touting the value sometimes of buying new. Sometimes it's better than being used, but sometimes going overboard on that new. If you're a contractor and you need a 4-wheel drive truck with a crew cab, there's a lot of options from all the manufacturers out there at about $40,000, and it's really easy to buy something that's $70,000 because it has leather seats and air conditioning and a bigger infotainment screen and fancier speakers, and it looks nicer. That's not what the idea is either. The customer has no idea what's going on inside there. They just know, is this thing rusted out? When the guy drives to the job site, how do the decals look on it? Does it look professional? A lot of the bells and whistles and options on vehicles and equipment that's what starts making used equipment, new equipment, not the preferential choice. If we look at, there's something reliable, functional, it's going to get the job done, that's at the beginning of its useful economic life cycle, that's an entirely different discussion than the vehicle or piece of equipment with all the bells and whistles. That's the most expensive one money can buy. That's generally the other side of that spectrum where you've gone too far.
Right. Treat yourself, but not too much.
That's right. Yeah.
If you don't use a piece of equipment or vehicle if you don't use a piece of equipment or a vehicle that often, can use be a better?
Yeah, it can be better. So let's think about the piece of equipment. Let's say you're a general contractor and you need a dump truck, a big 5-ton truck to drive all the demolition stuff to the dump. But this truck, you probably use it once a month. It's not your daily driver. It's not the one you're going back and forth to sites on all the time. But at the same time, if you rent or pay someone, by the time you make 2 trips to the dump, this old used truck is going to save you. Those sorts of things where you're not using them every day, and it's not highly critical if it goes down for a day. It's not really going to interrupt your operations, and it's pretty expensive to rent or pay someone else to do it. Yeah, sometimes you can start looking to get the real bargains, right? I've seen a lot of people do really well in terms of they just look at equipment that they're using sporadically, and is there a cheap bargain basement option out there? And again, it's something that you don't use every day, and something that doesn't really matter if it goes down for a day or not. It's not going to affect your operations or that too much. Sometimes you can go really cheap on those options. Those are the ones to really be frugal on. So I think that's what we have here today on this episode. Thanks again for tuning in, guys. If you can hit the like button and subscribe, it'd be much appreciated. Also, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments below, and we'll try to address them in future videos. Thanks very much.